Hello and welcome to the Creative Outcomes Podcast. My name is Tracy Brooker, and today with me, I have a very, very dear friend of mine, Rachel Mendelson. So let's just go ahead and get started. So Rachel, if you can tell me a little bit about yourself, such as where you're from and how you came to know and understand homeschooling, unschooling.
Yes, so the first thing to mention, because people will wonder about my accent, is that I was born in Israel and grew up in Israel and moved here to the United States when I was probably 26 or so. So I definitely still have the accent. So if you're wondering, it's Israeli, the accent. And I actually became interested in general in alternative education when I was 13 or 14. And I found A.S. Neal book, Summerhill, which I read,
That's good.
From cover to cover and was very influenced by, it resonated with me what he talked about, that kids teach themselves or find what interests them, because I was very much that way as a kid. I read a lot and I found things that really interested me and I wanted to follow through with them. And school was just bothering me to do that.
Now,
I had to fit school into it.
yeah. Now, you had talked about being born and raised in Israel, but can you, because I know this personally about you, but can you share how you were raised? Because we talk about this a lot.
Right. So I grew up in a kibbutz in Israel, which is a communal, what do you call it? It's a community. It's a communal way, or commune, you would call it here. And the people got to know or hear about communes during the 60s, the hippie times. But in actual fact, it was a multi-generational community and that very much believed in equality and that everybody did what they could and received what they needed. So it was built like that financially, but it wasn't a hippie thing,
right?
Like people think about.
Well, here's my question is, so knowing you were raised in a kibbutz communal, but what was your school like? Did you have school in there or was it different?
No, we had school in there, but it was much more open than schooling here. We definitely had school, and I remember, but we also had, we spent a lot of time outside and we played a lot of games. I remember inventing so many games to play with other kids. So it very much affected, my creativity in general. And school was there, and while we were in the kibbutz in the first few years, it was even, I remember my what do you call it, 5th grade. It was so boring to me being in actual classes in school.
Okay.
Then we moved to a bigger school, and at least the social aspect was more interesting. It was, but I remember school was always, I loved, I guess, learning to read in the beginning, and then I read a lot, but oftentimes school was just boring to me. That's what I remember. And when I grew up, it became even torturous. I wasn't built to sit.
So there was this kind of part of like the compulsory education still.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It was still the same. But, the thing we had more in the kibbutz is the outside. And I remember playing out so much. And I think that was when we were growing up in general.
Right. Yeah.
We were much more, whether you were here in the United States.
Oh, yeah. We went outside. They made a point to make sure it wasn't just your lunch recess. We had 15, 20 minutes in the morning, like if you didn't, and then we had an afternoon recess. So.
Right. What I remember, though, that I always loved reading since I learned it, probably 1st grade or whatever. And and in the kibbutz, there were rules. They will take us to the library and allow us to check out 3 books and take them for the week.
Yeah.
And I would obviously finish them much before. And because I don't know even why, but I don't think I thought I could ask anybody to go to the library again before the end of the week. So I would sneak into the library. There was a window open.
Oh
and
my
I
gosh.
I
That's
would
hilarious.
sneak into and for 3 years at least, I think from 7 to 10 or whatever, I would sneak into the library in the middle of the week, crawl to the children area and read books and then sneak
That's
out.
awesome.
So, so the whole reading, I think, became to me an adventure, and it was just my thing. So,
I love it. So here you are, and you come across this book.
Right, Summerhill.
And
Again,
you read it. And I know that feeling because I remember, one of the first books that even I read, there's this kind of, especially when I was starting to homeschool and then go to unschooling, there's this, but you were young.
Yeah, I was 13, 14, and that became my passion, alternative education. I thought, why does anybody need to tell me what I want to know, what I need to learn?
Yeah, wow.
Summerhill was in the beginning of this, I think the 1920s in English. It was kind of, in England, it was kind of the first democratic school that existed.
Right.
And it just grabbed me. And then I started reading so many books about alternative education. I remember reading Carl Rogers. It was Freedom to Learn. I remember even Illich. I don't remember what was his book, but I read so many books about alternative education. And that became my passion.
Nice.
Which kind of, as life went through, I forgot about it until I became pregnant with my oldest. And then everything came back to me.
Wow. Okay.
And other things I learned since then, right?
Now, when you had your kids, it was here in the United States or in Israel?
In the United States.
Okay.
And I actually...
Because I want you to talk about your experiences when you went back to Israel.
Right. Okay. But in the beginning, it was in the United States, and I actually met a homeschooling family in a course I took about taking care of brain damaged children.
Okay.
Because my brother was that, and we were looking for ways of taking care of him. And in that course, they talked about how children can learn from very young, everything and anything. And I was pregnant when I was taking that course with my oldest. And I met a family, I still remember them, of homeschoolers at that course. She had 2 boys and 1 girl, and they impressed me a lot. So that's when I met homeschooling. It wasn't through the regular channels.
That was real life rather than a book.
Yeah, it was real life. It impressed me a lot. And then I came across John Holt's books, who's kind of the daddy of unschooling, right?
Yeah.
But that was the first time I didn't really know about homeschooling. It was alternative education, but not homeschooling, until I was pregnant with my oldest, and I met a family who did that. So, and that, then we were living in New York City, and I had my kid, and I just was in the closet about homeschooling in a sense.
I love it.
Didn't tell anybody. I just kept him home. We lived life. And then I was so impressed by how he was learning things and following what interested him.
Right.
That I just kept telling to people, they would ask, when will you send him to this or school or whatever? And I said, when it will be right. And
right.
It became right when he was 16 and started going to community college.
Right.
But until then, it wasn't right. So, and it very much impressed me. And I implore anybody who starts homeschooling or just have a kid to watch how they learn things.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. Observation is very much part of being a homeschooling or unschooling parents, because if you really observe your children, first of all, you get to know them individually, and each one of them is so different.
Yep.
It's one thing you have to keep. Whatever you learn from the first one won't necessarily help you with the second one, because they're so different.
Yes.
So,
and they learn differently. Their interests are different, and they learn differently.
Absolutely. And it's so I just observed them, and I was amazed every time how they were learning and what they were learning. And I was doing my thing, just I already worked. We started a business because I knew that if I wanted to stay home with my kids, I had to work for myself. I couldn't really go out anywhere. And we started the business already. So I was starting to do the financial stuff. My husband was doing the operations, and like many couples who do their own business.
Right.
I was doing the finances.
For you, the motivation was, I want to continue this, to be home with my kids. So how do we make it work? Yeah.
That was the issue since I was pregnant already, because I decided then that this is what I'm going to do. It all came back, what I was so interested in when I was 13, 14, and read so much about alternative education, and then meeting that homeschooling family and reading John Holt, and it just all came together.
Okay, so this is what's, I think, is a great part of the story is, so you go back to Israel.
Right. And
because there's what our audience doesn't know is that you were one of the first individuals to kind of bring this homeschooling, unschooling to Israel.
Right.
So you go back to Israel. And how old were the kids?
So my boys were, my oldest 5.5 and my youngest 2.5. So we moved back to Israel. And I said that I just wanted to continue to do homeschooling in Israel, but it didn't exist there. So I started, it wasn't allowed. And I remember my dad telling me this would never work in Israel. And I still had the confidence of a young person. And I said, just watch me.
Right. Nice.
Telling him that. And I found somebody who was then in the parliament, and I knew him from the kibbutz that I grew up on. And I asked him what can be done if I want, because another guy from his party was then the education minister in Israel. So I said, how can I do that? And he says, write a letter, and it's not really available here, but write a letter and see what happens. So that's what I did. I wrote a letter to the Minister of Education, and told him about homeschooling and that it's allowed everywhere in the world except Germany, because that was the reality then.
Which is still true.
It's still true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Sweden now doesn't allow it anymore, but the rest of the world, it's available. And we were living then in a very small town. So they would ask me about the kids in school. My son turned 6, so obviously then you actually have to send your children earlier. But at 6, they started asking me in the town. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm in touch with the Ministry of Education, which covered them.
Right. Nice.
If I'm in touch with the Ministry of Education, it covers them. They don't have to, which it took them 2 years to get back to me. And I know they asked in a democratic school in Israel about homeschooling and stuff like that, because I heard from one of the principals in a democratic school that I knew that he was asked about it. But eventually they gave me permission to homeschool. Then my youngest was still young. And I think he became the first kid to officially be allowed to homeschool in Israel.
Now, did they ever come to you and like ask questions and demand, You know how like even some of the states here, you have to have
Yeah,
portfolios.
yeah. They didn't, because it
Okay.
was they did write that I would have to have an inspector come in every 6 months or so and check the kids. I knew nothing would happen, because really one child who homeschools and all those kids in public school need
So
so much more attention.
did an inspector actually come?
Never came.
Never came.
Never came.
Okay.
But I remember that's the first time I experienced actual homeschooling with my child, because I was afraid they would come and asking questions. So I remember sitting with him for 2 days trying to teach him math. Now, he was very good at math. He really understood it, right? But I tried to teach him a method of adding a zero, like 4 and 4 is 8. So if you add 0 to make 40 and 40, it would be 80.
Right.
He got so frustrated. This is not math. This is just a system, right?
Wow.
And he really, really understood numbers, and nothing made sense to him when I said, add a 0.
Because that was your way.
Because that's what was the school way also.
Yeah. Well, but even that, like, that's what I realized with mine. I remember my husband's like, okay, and he's here at the whiteboard showing my son. I already knew my son had it. And my son's looking at him like, and I said, leave him alone. He's got it. You're like confusing him. He has it in his head, his way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Children don't learn abstract.
Yes.
And adding zeros is abstract. It's not real math. Now, my kids were playing Legos constantly. If you play Lego as a child, you totally understand math. You really do. You really, really do. So that was the extent of our homeschooling, those 2 days that I tried to teach him stuff. And then we both got so frustrated, and we just let it go. So, he continued. One more thing that happened in Israel then, I remember, because we were doing homeschooling and it was so different, then people would ask us and start to quiz him. We even went to a TV show that they talked about, and the host started asking him math questions.
I didn't know this.
And it flabbergasted me. I said, really? But I remember my husband said one thing too that I think is very important for anybody who starts homeschooling, or they would ask him what would be in the future with him, right? If he doesn't go to school. Right. And he says, I'm not sure, but what about now? Isn't now more important of how he feels and if he's happy and if he's, and I always read that
the presence of the now.
The now, people always take this, they start, homeschooling.
Ooh, that's heavy, because if we're not worrying about the past and we're not concerned about the future, all you have is right now.
Yeah. And you can check with your kids right now. How are they doing? What are they doing? Are they happy now? What is it? We don't really know, Now after the pandemic, everybody who's a planner knows that planning can change very easily.
Yeah. And compulsory education is always about planning for the future, right? Oh, so they can be career ready, and it's not about right now.
Always.
In this moment.
Yeah. It's never, anything that is now and doesn't sit well with the school curriculum it becomes a problem.
It becomes a problem.
It becomes a problem that you have to take care of. And you can so easily get rid of the problem, but getting rid of the rule that they have to do certain things at certain time.
Well, that's all that conditioning. And that's kind of my thing, is to hopefully get people to become aware of conditioning, of these kind of rules of standing in line, ring the bell, the kids line up, they all sit in their seats. They're told what to do, when to do it. They can't speak. You and I both know the endless question is, are your children getting socialized? constantly, what do we say? Is like too much. Can't we just all go home and be little hermits for a while? Because, right, I know when we were doing our group, we have the big group on Fridays and get together on Thursdays, and the kids, that sometimes I'm like, can't we just go home and not see people for a while?
Right,
But,
right.
yeah,
And
they're
what's
constantly socializing.
Yeah, they're
And
constantly
learning. So it's really funny. So let's talk about this, because you
Right.
brought up discussing this whole culture. And I just read the article by psychologist who sent his kids to, who's the psychologist? We always talk about him. And so he just did an article on the culture of children and how they did
Peter Gray. You're talking about
Peter Gray. Yes. So
Right,
if
right.
anybody look up Peter Gray, he just submitted an article about the culture of children and how he researched anthropologists and how
Right.
even what do you want to say, like the indigenous cultures, how they found that children. So I'm curious to know what you think about this, that the children, we think, yes, the children learn from the adults, but the children actually separate themselves, okay, in this idea, and they make fun of the adults and they mock the adults, like, so whether you are in America, tradition, like children still act like children, and throughout their own culture, they learn, they observe, and they figure things out. And I know you're very strong about this idea of culture. So please share.
Yeah. Jean, I think her name is Jean Laidloff, who wrote the continuum concept. She also stayed with a tribe, I think in the Amazonas, and observed how they were, taking care of children, and talked about very much that the continuum concept idea is that the culture is being absorbed by children wherever they are. And it doesn't really matter what the culture of the place is being observed by the children. And they learn it by playing all those games.
With children.
With children, within themselves,
yes,
they observe something, they play their games. And I remember doing the same when I was a kid, very much everything we saw, a movie or something, and then we would play a game and absorb whatever we saw, or that's how we figured things out. That's how children learn everything. But they also copycats. We talk about it when they're very young. That's part of the learning.
Absolutely.
That's how they
behaviors. I heard this before, is that they try on a different coat. So like, especially teenagers, they're always trying a new coat, right? We're gonna see if this behavior works. Something happens, they respond, and they try on this coat, and then they figure out, oh yeah, no, that one didn't work so well, based on consequences, natural consequences of whatever, good or bad. If it doesn't work out, we're gonna try on another coat because that's what teens, pre-teens, early adults do until they figure out who they are and what works for them.
Right. And I remember reading a quote by Sandra Dodd, who wrote a big book about unschooling, I think. And she said that she gave a definition to unschooling, and she said that unschooling is arranging for natural learning. Mm-hmm. But for me, life is arranging for natural learning. You don't really need to arrange anything.
Nothing has to be arranged, right? Nothing has to be done. Right.
It happens constantly. Whatever you do in your life, your children would learn. And if you do a holiday, or you go to a church, or you go to anywhere, anything that is part of, or you go to a store, anything that is part of the culture is observed by the children. I remember going with my son when he was 2 or something to a toy store that was close to our apartment in Brooklyn. And And I said, no, I can't buy it for you. He wanted some toy. I don't have money with me. And he says, use that plastic card or something.
Yeah.
Observed.
Okay,
that I
but
use plastic.
in a good way, like I will share, my son, they got their debit cards early. Like people kind of freaked out about that. Age 11, he's like, I'm ready. Had their own bank accounts, had the debit cards, and have figured out the banking system at an early age versus, right?
And they figure everything. My daughter was born so much later than my kids, and we were already in Arizona, and I went with her to a chiropractor, and while I went through my treatment, the lady that was working there printed for her coloring pages for Halloween.
Right.
And she loved it. And we came back and she says, can you print me more of these? And I says, I don't know how to do it. And she says, just Google it. She was 3 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, Google is already
Yeah,
in the
that's
culture.
awesome.
They just learn from everything and anything you do and any person you meet and they just because that's who we are as humans.
Yeah.
And the idea of putting learning between 6 to 18 years old is so random.
And the research goes against all of that. We both know that the research shows, the brain is on fire, especially from 0 to 5. And what do? We'll have some play, but now it's even worse. Now it's more strict in preschools. Yeah. So they say by grade 7, creativity is virtually gone. So we push them into these standards, this conditional compulsory education, and that firing starts to diminish, unfortunately.
Yes, and it's just it just, to me, anything they learn, they figure out on their own, stays there. And Absolutely. Then so many kids learn math, for instance, or through the Google. Or my kids used to play on the Game Boy Tetris, which is 1 to 10, and they, you have to figure out where to put the blocks. And so when they got to that age of going to school, they already knew all that. Okay. 1 to 10. And then you spend the whole year in school of 1 to 10.
That's correct.
Confuse the heck out of them, just like I was confusing my son with the zeros, right?
That's correct. No, when it becomes meaningful, it actually stays in the brain longer. That was the Irvine did the research, and they came across this. They did MRIs, they did the firing of the brain, and what they found out is curiosity drives learning. Now, I knew that only because I did special ed, and anyone who's done special ed knows a lot of those kids don't do well in traditional schooling. And so we have to figure out as educators, how do they learn and what motivates them? Otherwise, they have no motivation. So, and motivation, right, helps learning. So intrinsic motivation. And so, and people can look this up. It was through University of Irvine. It's how did curiosity drives learning? And so they were like, hey, we should get this into schools. Because then what they found out, which I think is linked to Sandra Dodd, that if you could even create curiosity. And if you create curiosity, then the brain, leans in, and the brain's like, ooh, what's this? And, then that brings that intrinsic motivation for kids to learn, and then it sticks in their brain longer. I want to share a story. This actually happened last night. We were discussing, I don't know, with my son, and my son took all these acting classes. And I think we were talking about him when they do slates, when you do a slate, when you're an actor, like, hi, my name is Michael Brooker. Oh, I know, because he's with Praxis. He's doing and he was talking about how they had a woman come in. It was like a workshop. And he said, he's got his group and they're all on Zoom. Hi, I'm Michael Brooker. And he asked this question. And at the end, she goes, thanks, Michael. And he was telling me this. And I said, you remembered that from your acting, don't you? And he goes, yes. And he goes, and she remembered my name. And so he knows, like, now as an adult, he can reach out to her through network LinkedIn, like, hi, you know.
Right.
But we were laughing due to how that one little thing of learning a slate and how to do, you know, because that was his motivator in acting, and how that, just like you said, you go to school later, right? And then here he's an adult learning, networking, and introduces himself to a, you know, a CEO. I mean, I was like, and you know, that's something you don't learn in college and school,
No,
but that was his motivation.
right. But I also remembered how we talked about anchored learning, right? If a
Yeah.
kid is into Lego, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, he's into Lego. He learns math from it, right? Obviously, he learns how to follow instructions. If he buys, you know, a Lego game that he has to put together,
Right.
he learns
Absolutely.
how to read from all those little booklets that they get, right?
Right. Following instructions, 1, 2, right?
He learns about, you know, other times if he's dealing with pirates or whatever it is, right? He does imagination storytelling because that's what they do when they play those games, right?
Right. Well, the Pokemon cards or the magic cards, and learning and strategizing. And
so that's what I'm saying, though. If you're interested, and it happened to me like with the homeschooling when I got into it at 13, 14, everything, and still everything everything that I read somehow connects to me, to alternative education, or to how people learn, or to how people get motivated. It's all part of, that's my focus, my interest for many years. And everything I learn, I connect to it, and then obviously remember, right? So much better. And that's what kids do when they follow their own interest. It's firing their brain, but they connect everything and remember so much more because they're connected to what they're at the moment totally absorbed with. And that's just like Michael and his acting, you know, it now connects to him to so many other things.
Absolutely. In life.
And life.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying, you know, the thing to remember, and if you start early with your children and you don't send them to school or preschool or whatever, and even if you send them, if you observe them,
observation,
they have their interest, they have their curiosity, and curiosity, you have to give it credit, or you have to respect it. It's not something clear. Nobody knows why somebody is curious about this or that, or you know, we just don't know.
And
we're born with that.
Yeah. Right? You know, I always talk about feed the monster. Use their curiosity, feed it. You know, they want books on it. They want movies on it. Go find it and just watch their little brains go. And I think that's, you know, for parents who, like me, you're raised in a compulsory education system, right? And I'm a teacher too. There were these, and again, going back to our own conditioned minds. Mm-hmm. So I was raised in a conditional system atmosphere. And to stay with observation and notice their strengths and what they're learning versus what they're not learning, and their weaknesses, because that is the compulsory education system, right? We have a grading system, everyone's in a grade level, and it's based upon what you either know or don't know. Right. And I think that's where, if we can look at, you know, even if you choose to do curriculum, like, mm-hmm. Okay, here's this, okay, yeah, no big deal. You know, even when my kids were in school, because my kids were in school for a little bit, I remember my oldest, I mean, we're talking first or second grade, he failed something and he came out and he was really upset. I said, all right, let's go get ice cream. You know, I refused to make him bad for doing bad on a test, because I told him, who cares? Like, who cares? I don't care. That's not what life's about. And in essence, that's what pulled him into that's where my homeschooling journey started, was because emotionally he saw the other kids were getting smiley faces, and he came home and he goes, I'm not getting a smiley face. And my curious, positive, fun-loving kid was emotionally being scarred at the age of 9. And I said, that's it. And I told him, when we homeschool, there will be no markers, no, or you want to put stickers, you put as many stickers. Like, that's not what learning's about. And we shouldn't be judged on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Not only that, if you don't embrace failing, you don't embrace real learning, because so often
okay, you messed up. No big deal.
No, but so often when we fail, we figure things out.
Yeah.
And we remember them so much better.
I mean, but think about that. They're in school from preschool to 12th grade, go to college, they go into the real world, something happens. And as young adults, they're scarred there. And it's because, or even that, the stress from even high school, middle school to high school, because they need the stress of getting the scholarships, getting the good grades. That's so much pressure. And then now we're in this whole pandemic thing. The pressure on kids alone today isn't worth it. I mean, their lives are so much more than grades. It just is. Okay, so here, follow that. Here's my question is, what was your greatest challenge when it came to unschooling?
I think I had several of them. Trusting was not one of them, because I think I started early with my children and I learned to trust them and their ability to learn. And they actually blew my mind. They still blow my mind until today, how they learn things and how they use them. It's just amazing, I think. So trusting was not, but the culture that I was brought up in definitely came up. I think John Holt said once that you don't have to, that you have to deschool yourself, or have to take the idea of how you learn in school out of your system.
That's correct.
When you are,
that takes practice, trust me.
It takes practice, and it takes, it takes trust, and it takes putting all those voices in your head from when you grew up aside. Yep. So the culture definitely, first of all, the culture, it was hard for me to just stay with my kids home and say, oh, I'm a homemaker, or I'm staying with my kids. I don't have a career, right? Supposedly. Right. I remember that was my first challenge, to just put it aside and say, you are doing what you think is right, and your children are worth it. So that was my first thing from culture to put aside. And I know many homeschooling moms who even left a career, like being a lawyer or being whatever, had to contend with that and put it aside and say, yeah, I'm with my kids at home, and that would be okay, right?
Right.
So that was the first culture. Then it was obviously schooling. And what would happen in the future with your children. And that not only it wasn't so much my fear, but I saw how it sips into their lives. They believe.
Yes. Wow.
They became 13 years old. You
yes.
have to take into account that children will hear those things. Like, even at 6 or 7, a kid in where we were in Israel was telling my son that he would never be able to find a job because he doesn't go to school. Right. So you have to work with that with your children, because they don't have much else to look at, right? Correct. Remember, yes. my son at 12 told me something like, I don't have a reference for how I grew up. He was then reading a lot of books of kids who went to school, right? And then I found the Grace Llewellyn book, Teenage Liberation Handbook, and I bought it for him. So he'll have some reference of people who don't go to school. But right. It was, your kids would be exposed to it. When my youngest one at 13 also was told how he will never find a job, will never get work because he doesn't go to school, and they believe it. Or
Yeah.
how would he learn anything? They already knew so much already, obviously.
Correct.
Everything they knew so much about, and still they believed that because they didn't go to school, they know
That's
nothing.
correct. Right, that something is wrong, something's different, yes.
And he said,
They're not within the culture, society. Right.
So I said, okay, let's prepare for it a year, and then you can go to school. And then his older brother started going to community college. So he said, nah, I'll just do that later. But it was very much as a teenager starting to sip into them that culture. They were how do you say it? Wondering and questioning whether they know anything.
Right. Well, I will share. One of my favorite conversations with one of my boys is because he was doing improv with his friends who were schooled, and the young woman she went to the middle school and she had to memorize a monologue from a Shakespeare play. And she was very upset because she has to go home and memorize this and blah, blah, blah. And I hate Shakespeare. And so my son, who is 2 years younger than her, oh, what's that play? And I think it was As You Were, or whatever it was. And so
like it, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And so he goes, oh, I know that monologue. And he states the monologue and what's going on. And she's looking at him. And so we're driving home, she's with her mom, and he goes, so you mean I'm learning stuff and having fun? Because at the time he was at a homeschool theater group, just like
Right.
your daughter was, same group. And it's funny because they don't even see that because they're just having fun. And here they're learning Shakespeare, learning stories, and having a great time on stage. And the irony, we see her 2 days later, hey, how'd you do in your monologue? And she goes, well, I got a B because the teacher had to help me. So she still hated Shakespeare. She hated that she got graded on it. There's just no fun whatsoever.
Yeah, I remember my son, when he went to an acting group, that was not the homeschooling, that was much earlier. I think it was in Valley Youth Theater or somewhere, or maybe it was Phoenix Youth Theater. I don't remember, but he came back and he says, nobody knows about Gandhi. I thought it was so funny.
That's hilarious.
Obviously, when you're homeschooling or unschooling, you don't really follow a specific curriculum. You don't have a check mark on what they learned today and how much they know about this or that.
I think too, the parents just need to know, listen, this might happen. This is going to come up because this is what they're facing,
Yes. This is a culture around them.
But it does change because I think once they kind of see the reality around them, whether they go to community college, both of mine went early, and that was the whoa, but in a good way. They felt very empowered. It does change, themselves.
But it would come up, and that is a challenge in homeschool because there's not enough of us, so to speak. Even if we
the power of homeschool groups and having a community to support each other is huge.
Right. And it's still, the culture is so strong. Even now in the pandemic, parents are so afraid that their kids are missing out in school and will never catch up.
Right.
Which, the truth of the matter, and that's important for parents to know, especially now, is that you can miss many, 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 many school years and still catch up very easily.
Absolutely.
Later on, when it's important to you and it makes sense to you, and
it'll be meaningful. They'll be motivated. Right. Yeah, it's different, but to force it on them just makes it.
And we know it because our kids went to community college and did very well in their classes, and some of that they didn't really learn in a very organized way, or we didn't know how much they learned or didn't, how much they knew or didn't know, right?
That's correct.
But it's just what I think we have to bring to ourselves when we get so worried about, and the culture says, talks in our heads or in our kids' heads, is that always, and every adult knows it, you learn what you need to learn or want to learn.
Well,
You know,
I think
when
you
you go
answered my
to new work or anything, right?
yeah, I think you answered my next question is what would be your advice?
Yes, absolutely. That and what my husband said, you know, when we were in Israel in the beginning. What about now?
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love it.
the fear factor will come. That's one of the challenges. What if I'm doing everything wrong? What if if I'm setting my kids to fail at everything because I don't do the accepted thing, right?
Yeah.
The fear will come. And then you just have to, I remember reading Eckhart Tolle and The Power of Now.
Yep.
And that it didn't, I was more confident about homeschooling, but in business, it really helped me when we would go through one of the ups, one of the downs. Business always goes ups and down, right? But one of the downs, I would talk to my husband and say, okay, but right now, and that's what Eckhart Tolle says, right now, everything's okay.
Yes.
Right now. And if you keep saying right now,
In this moment. Yeah. I usually say in this moment, what's happening
everything's
right
okay.
now? I
Exactly.
am sitting here, right? Doing a podcast with my friend in this
Yes.
moment. Yes.
It's an important sentence, and it can be used in anything in life, but definitely with your children. When fear comes to, or your parents or your family ask, wondering about what would happen with your children. And my family did, my mother, I remember when my son first went to community college, and took his test and got very high, whatever, right? He tested into algebra, I think, the first course, or calculus, I think, actually. And then also to the, what do you call it? The English honors and whatever, which he decided very cleverly not to take. He said, Mom, it will just be too much work for nothing, which I agreed with him. But in any case, I remember my mom telling me, oh, you did, just when I told her that he got into community college, that he's taking these courses, he said, oh, you did such a great job. Well, you're such a good teacher. That was, so many years after. And
Yes.
she knew my son. He was always articulate and clever,
Yes.
and had great conversations with her. And still, only when she got the okay from the community college or from the test, because
Oh,
we
absolutely.
test them, that's when she accepted that it's okay.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge for anybody with a family.
Yeah.
Most of us
I think many of our viewers definitely can relate. We have the socialization, people questioning you on what you're teaching them,
right.
whatever, instead of just, oh, yeah. I mean, I would just go, oh, like, and it wasn't until they went to community college and this and that. And, my kids have and are successful in whatever they're doing right now. Like,
Yeah.
again, it's just like right now in this moment, be happy. Don't worry about the grades. Don't worry about, like they're starting to think they have a goal. You have a goal. What do you have to do to get the goal? And are you happy with that?
Right.
Like, because now that you're adults, it's not about me. It's about you and what you want to do for your life and whatever it takes for you.
And
to
it's
get
never
there.
really about you. And
Yeah,
that's what you have to,
absolutely.
It's about them. It's who they are, how they do things, what's important to them. And
Well, and
that's
I
a
will
challenge
say,
as a parent, because I
well,
remember
that's
my
that whole conditioning, is this reflection of, I'm a bad mom, I'm a bad, because they didn't go to school, because, and this
right,
idea of outcomes. And I think that's what
right,
I've loved about creative outcomes is that
right,
it doesn't matter, how they got to their outcome. Like it's exactly for who they are and whatever that is they want to do. And it's not about us.
right.
No,
It's not about us.
not
And
about us.
and there's so many ways to learn things. But talking about one other challenge, I remember my older son being in a theater group and spending many, many hours there, doing the shows and rehearsing. And so many of his friends there went to this school or that school and brought their homework and was showing their A grades, getting an A on this test. He had a problem that he wasn't getting tested.
Yeah. Wow.
And that he couldn't say, oh, I have an A in this or A in that. And only when he started going to community college, he can, show his grades. But
Yeah.
that was a problem for him.
Yeah, but now, like, even at this age, if that's what motivates them, I mean, we have to allow them the space then to, like, that's what motivates them. That's not up to us again. It's not.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not about us. It's not up to us.
Yep.
And whatever way you choose in life or schooling you choose in life, right? Yeah. It's still up to the kid and anything and everything. And all you can do is support them and love them.
Be there for them, right?
And allow them to go through whatever they go, and don't take it personally yourself. Okay. That's always a challenge because but I don't think it matters whether you send your kids or what education system you choose for your kids. I think every mother goes through, oh, I'm such a bad mom moment.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Well, that's our ego, that's our conditioning. And it's, again, it's all about that and learning to be present within. And here I am. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Get out of your head. Get out of your head. It's all going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And
there you go. There's your next book. It's all going to be okay. So, well, Rachel, so we will stop right here. Quick question. How can people get a hold of you if they have questions, would like some coaching?
Well, they can definitely send you or I an email at info@creativeoutcome.org. And we'll answer.
And we'll answer. Thank you so much, Rachel. This is our intro for our Creative Outcomes podcast. And there is no one who can better answer your questions and be a incredible support system, as she has been for me throughout my journey and Israel's journey when it came to homeschooling. But thank you, Rachel. And so everyone, thank you for taking the time to listen to our Creative Outcomes podcast. Please check us out on Facebook. You could go to our website at creativeoutcomes.org. And let's see, I don't know if we're on any other, we're on Facebook, but we got to work on our other social media. Oh, we'll definitely be posting on YouTube as well. So thank you. And you guys have a good day. Take care.